Let's talk about the number I. So far, we've been able to solve a lot of equations, but we can write a simple equation, x squared plus 1 equals 0, that we can't solve yet without introducing a new number, which is what we use I for. Right? It would be nice to solve this equation. It's so simple. So let's do that. Let I squared, if we take that number, whatever it is, and we square it, let's let that give us -1, right? And then plugging in I for x here would give us I squared. Well, this would give -1 plus 1 equals 0. Check. Now we've solved our equation with this new number, I. Okay, so taking this a bit further, then we can see that I must be the square root of -1. So right there is two different ways of looking at the number I. There we go. Okay, and we can add this into our number system, and it allows us to solve a whole new kind of equation, and really does a lot. It's called an imaginary number, but this is used in all kinds of very real applications. So originally, it was kind of thought of as a purely mathematical notion, but now it's used all over the place in engineering and physics and mathematics. It's a very common and fundamental part of the field. So let's take a look at a couple of examples here. Okay, so here we have square root of -49. Okay, well, let's see here. We want to break this up. Square root of -1 times the square root of 49. That's how to look at this. And then the square root of -1, well, we already decided that that's I. And then the square root of 49 is 7. And we usually write this as 7I. Right? The I comes after the number as long as it's not a radical. If it's a radical, it comes before it. We'll get to that. So there we go, 7I. That's how we write that number. Let's try the second one here. Square root of -32. Okay, so we need to find a perfect square inside of 32. So let's see here. We could do 8 and 4. No, I'm thinking 16 and 2, because 16 is 4 times 4. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this square root of -32 as the square root of -1 times the square root of 16 times the square root of 2. Okay, well, we already decided the square root of -1 was I. Square root of 16 is 4, and then the square root of 2, well, that's kind of stuck behind. And we write this as 4I rad 2. So the I comes after a whole number or a fraction like 4, but it comes before a radical. So when you have a number and a radical, the I gets sandwiched in between the two. And that's how you write it, like so. Okay, let's take a look at 63. Square root of -63. Okay, so the number 63, again, we're trying to find a perfect square in here. 63 is 9 times 7, and there's our perfect square, 3 and 3. So let's rewrite this as square root of -63 is square root of -1, that's going to be our I, times the square root of 9 times the square root of 7. So this becomes I times 3 times rad 7, and then write it in the correct order, 3I rad 7. And eventually you kind of begin to skip this step. And as soon as you see a negative, more intuitively you think of it as it pops out as an I. right? In practice, that's what happens. You don't keep writing this square root of -1 here like that. You just bring that negative out as an I and call it good.